Quiet
Open your
down.
legs.
Stop
I won't
struggling and
stop
listen
until
to
my
me.
child is in your
Let go.
womb.
I can't
A
breathe.
70-year-old rancher to his giant bride he was known across the valley as a man who never bent. At 70 years old, the rancher still woke before sunrise, still rode his land with slow confidence, and still believed the world worked best when people obeyed clear rules. His ranch stretched farther than the eye could see, fields, fences, cattle, and dust shaped by decades of control. To the townspeople, he was powerful, wealthy, and unmovable, like the land itself. People respected him, but few truly liked him. He spoke little, expected much, and never explained himself. For years, neighbors wondered why he never remarried after his first wife passed. Some said he was married to the ranch. Others believed no woman could tolerate his rigid ways. He had no children, and as time passed, whispers began to grow louder. People noticed how often he spoke about legacy, about leaving something behind that carried his name. To him, land was not enough. He wanted proof that his life would continue beyond him. Far away from the ranch, the woman who would later become his bride lived a very different life. She was young, tall, and strong, with a presence that made people look twice when she entered a room. Her height had earned her the nickname the Giant since childhood, though she never liked it. Life had taught her to endure comments, stares, and judgments quietly. She grew up poor, learned to work early, and believed survival meant accepting what was offered without asking for more. Opportunity came when she least expected it. Through distant connections and careful arrangements, the rancher expressed interest in marriage. The offer came wrapped in promises of security, comfort, and stability, things she had never truly known. There was no romance, no long courtship, no gentle words. It was a proposal built on terms and expectations, not feelings. Still, for someone who had spent her life struggling, the idea of safety was powerful. When the news reached the town, reactions were mixed. Some were shocked by the age difference. Others focused on her size, whispering cruel jokes behind closed doors. Many assumed she had married for money. Few asked what she wanted, and fewer still cared. In the rancher's world, decisions were final once spoken, and this marriage was no exception. The wedding itself was quiet and formal. No music filled the air, no laughter echoed across the land. Guests came out of obligation, not celebration. The rancher stood tall in his stiff suit, his expression unreadable. The bride stood beside him, calm on the surface, nervous beneath. She told herself this was a new beginning, that stability would be worth the adjustment. She believed strength meant adapting. From the very first day at the ranch, she sensed the imbalance. The house was large but cold, filled with rules that were never written down yet strictly enforced. Meals were served at exact times. Silence was preferred over conversation. Decisions were made without her input. She was given everything she needed but nothing she truly wanted. Comfort existed but warmth did not. The rancher spoke often about the future but never asked her how she imagined it. His words carried weight, expectation, and certainty. He believed marriage was an agreement, not a partnership. In his mind, providing shelter and security was enough. Emotions, opinions, and personal desires were distractions he did not value. She tried to adjust. She learned the routines of the ranch, the rhythm of the days, and the unspoken rules of the household. Workers respected her but kept their distance. They followed the rancher's lead, treating her more like a figure placed beside him than a person with her own story. Loneliness settled in slowly, like dust after a long drive. At night, when the house grew quiet, her thoughts grew loud. She wondered if she had made the right choice, if safety without understanding was truly better than struggle with freedom. She reminded herself of where she came from, of the hardships she had left behind. She told herself patience was strength, that time would soften things. But time did not soften the rancher. It sharpened him. His focus narrowed, his expectations became heavier, and his words grew more demanding. He spoke of duty and purpose, of what he believed marriage was meant to achieve. His past successes had taught him that persistence always led to results. He had never learned what it meant to listen. The town watched from a distance. From the outside, everything looked stable. The ranch continued to prosper. The couple appeared united at public events. No one saw the silence at the dinner table or the tension in the air. No one heard the heavy pauses after his words or felt the pressure that filled the rooms. For the bride, the early days of marriage became a test of endurance. She was strong in body, but strength of spirit was being quietly challenged. She realized that being provided for did not mean being valued. She began to understand that this union was not about love or companionship, but about control and expectation. Still, she did not speak up. Not yet. She observed, learned, and waited. Part of her hoped things would change. Another part began to prepare for the possibility that they would not. She stood tall as she always had, but inside, questions were growing. Questions about choice, dignity, and the cost of silence. This was only the beginning, the calm before deeper conflict. The first chapter of a life that would soon demand more than quiet endurance. Days on the ranch began to follow a strict pattern, and with each passing week, the bride felt the weight of expectations growing heavier. Morning came early. The rancher rose before dawn, moving with the same discipline he had practiced for decades. He expected the house to follow his rhythm. Breakfast was served at the same time every day. Silence filled the long table, broken only by the sound of cutlery and his brief instructions for the workers. At first, she believed routine would bring comfort. She told herself that structure meant stability. But soon, she realized the routine was not shared. It was enforced. When she woke later one morning after a restless night, his disappointment was clear without many words. A look, a pause, and a cold tone were enough to make her feel she had failed some unspoken test. He began to talk more often about purpose. His conversations circled back to the future, to what he believed marriage was meant to accomplish. He spoke as if time was chasing him, as if every day mattered more than the last. His age made him restless, and that restlessness showed in his words and behavior. He did not shout, he did not threaten. His control came through certainty, through statements that left no space for discussion. She listened quietly, nodding when expected. Inside, her thoughts ran in a different direction. She wondered why her role felt so small despite her strong presence. She wondered why her voice felt unnecessary in decisions that shaped her life. The rancher saw her strength as something useful, not something equal. He admired it the way one admires a tool that works well. The workers noticed changes too. They saw how she tried to help, how she offered kindness, how she asked questions about the land. Some responded warmly, others kept distance, unsure how much freedom they had to engage with her. Everyone understood one rule clearly: the rancher's word was final. No one challenged him and no one expected her to either. As weeks turned into months, pressure built quietly. Conversations became more direct, less patient. The rancher began measuring time not in seasons but in urgency. He spoke often of legacy, of what he believed defined a successful life. To him, love was proven through duty. Compromise felt like weakness. Listening felt unnecessary. She began to feel invisible, valued only for what she represented rather than who she was. At night, when the rancher slept, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the land. The wide open space that once felt freeing now felt isolating. She missed simple conversations, shared laughter, and being asked what she wanted. She tried small acts of resistance, gentle ones that did not invite conflict. She suggested changes to the household routine. She asked questions during meals. She expressed opinions carefully, choosing her words with caution. Most of the time, her efforts were met with silence or brief dismissal. The rancher was not cruel in obvious ways, but his indifference cut deep. The town continued to see only the surface. When they appeared together at events, they looked calm, even respectable. People whispered less over time, assuming the marriage had settled into something stable. From the outside, there was no drama, no visible struggle. But inside the ranch house, tension grew thicker with every unspoken thought. She began to notice how the rancher's health, though still strong, showed signs of strain. His movements were slower, his patience thinner. This seemed to increase his need for control rather than soften it. He believed control was the only way to keep order in a world that felt increasingly uncertain to him. One afternoon, after a long day, she found herself standing alone near the fence line, watching the sun lower over the fields. The land was beautiful, endless, and quiet. She felt small despite her size. In that moment, she realized how deeply alone she had become. Wealth and comfort surrounded her, but understanding did not. She started writing her thoughts in a small notebook she kept hidden. It became her private space, a place where she could speak freely without fear. She wrote about her past, her hopes, and her doubts. Writing reminded her that she still had a voice, even if it was not heard aloud. The rancher noticed her distance but misunderstood it. To him, silence meant agreement. He believed everything was moving forward as planned. When she grew quieter, he became more certain, more demanding in his expectations. He mistook her patience for acceptance. As pressure increased, so did her awareness. She began to see clearly that this marriage was not built to grow together, but to serve one direction only. She understood that waiting for change without action would lead only to deeper loss of self. Fear and courage battled quietly inside her. Part two of her story was not loud or dramatic. It was slow, heavy, and internal. It was the stage where understanding replaced hope, where observation replaced denial. The tension that had once been subtle now shaped every interaction. Something had to give, though neither of them yet knew how or when. The calm days on the ranch were slowly turning into a storm that could no longer be ignored. The change did not happen in one loud moment. It arrived quietly, through small realizations that slowly joined together. By now, the bride no longer felt confused about her place in the rancher's world. She understood it clearly, and that understanding brought both pain and strength. She stopped waiting for warmth that never came. Instead, she began paying close attention to herself. She noticed how her body moved with confidence, even when her heart felt heavy. She noticed how people listened when she spoke outside the ranch house, even if her words were ignored inside it. These observations planted a new thought in her mind. Maybe her value did not depend on his approval. Maybe her strength had been there all along, unused but ready. The rancher, on the other hand, grew more restless. Time weighed on him. Each passing month felt louder in his thoughts. He spoke more often about the future, about urgency, about plans that left no room for discussion. His words were firm, final, and full of certainty. He believed pressure was necessary, that results came from persistence. He did not see how his approach was pushing her further away. Their conversations became shorter but heavier. Silence stretched longer between words. When she disagreed, even gently, his reaction was cold and sharp. He did not shout, but his disappointment filled the room. He believed authority should never be questioned. To him, her resistance felt like betrayal rather than honesty. One evening, after a tense exchange, she stepped outside alone. The sky was wide and dark, filled with stars. The land was quiet except for the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Standing there, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future shaped by her own choices, not his demands. That night she wrote more than usual in her notebook. She wrote about fear, but also about courage. She wrote about how strength was not only physical, it was the ability to choose, to speak, and to walk away if needed. Writing helped her see her thoughts clearly. It reminded her that silence had been a choice too, and that choices could change. The next days brought small but meaningful actions. She began spending more time outside the ranch house, speaking with workers, learning about the land on her own terms. She offered help, listened to stories, and built quiet connections. People began to see her not just as the rancher's wife, but as her own person. Respect grew slowly but genuinely. The rancher noticed these changes but misunderstood them. He saw independence as distance and distance as defiance. His responses became more controlling, though still calm on the surface. He tightened rules, spoke with more firmness, and expected quick agreement. He believed order was slipping, and he intended to restore it. One afternoon, tension finally reached a point where silence could no longer hold. A simple conversation turned heavy. She spoke honestly, carefully choosing words that were firm but respectful. She expressed how she felt unseen, unheard, and reduced to expectations. Her voice did not shake. She stood tall, calm, and clear. The rancher was stunned. He had not expected her to speak this way. To him, the marriage had always been clear. He responded with certainty, repeating his beliefs, defending his expectations. He spoke of duty, tradition, and responsibility. He did not acknowledge her feelings. He dismissed them as unnecessary. That moment changed everything. She realized then that understanding would not come from him. The gap between them was not a misunderstanding, it was a difference in values. She felt sadness but also relief. Knowing the truth gave her direction. After that day, she stopped trying to explain herself repeatedly. Instead, she focused on preparing. She gathered information, learned her rights, and quietly explored options. Each step she took strengthened her confidence. Fear still existed, but it no longer controlled her. The rancher sensed the shift. He felt control slipping, though he could not name why. His health wavered, his patience thinned, and his certainty cracked slightly under pressure. Still, he clung to his beliefs, convinced that authority would restore order. The town remained unaware of the growing divide. From the outside, nothing dramatic had changed. But inside the ranch house, the balance had shifted. The bride was no longer enduring blindly. She was choosing awareness. She was choosing herself. Part 3 of her story was about awakening, not loud rebellion but quiet strength, not sudden escape but careful preparation. It was the moment when fear lost its grip and courage found its voice. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She would no longer disappear inside someone else's expectations. The storm was no longer approaching. It had begun. The days that followed were heavy with unspoken tension. Nothing dramatic happened at first, but everything felt different. The bride moved through the ranch with a new awareness. She no longer rushed to meet expectations that were never clearly explained. She did her part, but she also protected her space. This quiet shift unsettled the rancher more than open disagreement ever could. He tried to restore the old order by tightening his control. Rules became more specific. His tone became firmer. He reminded her of responsibilities and commitments, speaking as if repetition would bring obedience. But something had changed inside her. She listened, but she no longer absorbed his certainty as truth. His words landed, then passed through her without taking root. At night, the house felt colder than before. The silence was no longer just empty, it was filled with thoughts. She lay awake thinking about her life before the ranch, about how she had survived with less but felt more like herself. She realized that comfort without respect was another kind of hardship. This understanding did not bring instant peace, but it brought clarity. She began reaching beyond the ranch in small, careful ways. A short visit to town turned into longer conversations. She spoke with people who had known her before the marriage, people who remembered her strength and kindness. They listened without judgment. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. These moments gave her courage. She learned practical things too, how to stand on her own, how to make plans that did not depend on the rancher's approval. Each piece of knowledge felt like a brick laid beneath her feet, building a foundation where there had once been uncertainty. The rancher sensed the distance growing wider. He felt it at meals, in conversations that ended too quickly, in the way she no longer looked to him for direction. Fear crept into his thoughts, though he would never admit it. His world had always been controlled and predictable. Losing control felt like losing identity. His health began to show signs of strain. He tired more easily. His patience wore thin. Still, instead of softening, he hardened. He believed strength meant holding firm, even when the ground beneath him shifted. He could not understand that strength could also mean letting go. One evening, a disagreement that might once have passed quietly lingered in the air. Words were exchanged, calm but sharp. She did not raise her voice. She did not back down either. She spoke clearly about boundaries, about the need for respect, about being treated as a person rather than a role. Her calm unsettled him more than anger ever could. He responded with disbelief. To him, these ideas felt foreign and unnecessary. He believed providing security was proof enough of care. He could not see how his certainty had become a wall between them. The conversation ended without resolution, but its impact remained. After that night, the bride made a decision, not a sudden escape, but a steady move toward independence. She began setting aside resources, quietly and carefully. She planned without announcing her plans. Each step was taken with patience and caution, knowing that change required care. The ranch workers noticed her confidence grow. They saw how she stood taller, how she spoke with quiet authority. Some offered support in small ways, a kind word, a shared look of understanding. These gestures reminded her she was not alone. The rancher, meanwhile, struggled with the feeling that something precious was slipping away. He tried to reclaim certainty through routine, but routine no longer soothed him. The land that once gave him comfort now felt vast and empty. For the first time in his life, he faced the possibility that control could not fix everything. The town began to sense change as well. Rumors returned, softer but more curious. People noticed how the bride appeared alone more often, how her presence felt stronger and more assured. They wondered what was happening behind the ranch gates, though no one knew the full story. Inside the house, conversations became rare. When they happened, they were careful and restrained. There was no warmth, but there was honesty. She no longer pretended things were fine. He no longer pretended not to notice the distance. Both understood that the marriage was standing on fragile ground. The bride spent more time reflecting on what she truly wanted. She thought about dignity, freedom, and the right to choose her own path. These thoughts no longer frightened her. They guided her. Fear had not disappeared, but it no longer ruled her decisions. Part 4 of her journey was about action after understanding. Not rushed, not reckless, but deliberate. She was no longer waiting for permission to exist fully. She was preparing to step forward, whatever that might mean. The storm that had begun quietly was now impossible to ignore. Both lives were changing, whether they were ready or not. The final change came not with shouting or drama, but with a quiet certainty that settled deep inside the bride. She woke one morning feeling calm in a way she had not felt before. The fear that once followed her through the long halls of the ranch was no longer leading her thoughts. She understood now that her life did not have to remain frozen in a shape someone else had chosen for her. She moved through the house slowly that day, noticing details she had once ignored. The walls felt less heavy. The silence felt less threatening. It was as if her decision had shifted the air itself. She knew that whatever happened next, she would face it standing on her own feet. The rancher sensed something different too. He noticed her calm, her steady movements, her lack of hesitation. This unsettled him more than anger ever could. For the first time, he felt truly unsure. His authority had always been his anchor. Now it felt lighter, weaker, as if it no longer held the same weight. They sat together later that day, not out of routine but necessity. The conversation was not easy, but it was honest. She spoke clearly, without blame or harshness. She talked about dignity, about choice, about how a life cannot grow when one voice always silences the other. She did not accuse. She simply stated the truth as she lived it. The rancher listened, but his understanding was limited. Years of certainty do not break easily. Still, something in her calm reached him. He saw that control had not brought him peace. It had brought distance. He realized too late that providing comfort without respect had left him alone in his own house. What followed was not a dramatic ending but a necessary one. Decisions were made carefully and quietly. The bride chose a path that allowed her to reclaim herself. It was not easy. Letting go of security required courage. But staying would have meant losing herself completely, and that was a cost she could no longer pay. She left the ranch with little noise and no bitterness. She took with her the lessons she had learned, the strength she had discovered, and the belief that her voice mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was hers. Each step forward felt lighter than the last. The rancher remained behind, surrounded by the land he had controlled for so long. The silence he once demanded now followed him closely. In the quiet, he faced the consequences of his choices. He had wanted certainty, legacy, and control. What he was left with was reflection. Time passed. The ranch continued to function, but something had changed. The workers noticed the difference. The house felt emptier. The rancher moved slower now, not just in body but in spirit. He had time to think, perhaps for the first time in his life. For the bride, life slowly rebuilt itself. She found work that valued her effort. She built friendships that were based on mutual respect. Her strength, once seen only as something physical, became a symbol of resilience. She learned that independence was not the absence of struggle, but the presence of choice. The town spoke of the marriage for a while, then moved on. Stories faded as they always do. But the lesson remained, quietly passed between people who understood. Power without empathy creates distance. Security without respect creates silence. And silence, when held too long, eventually demands change. She often reflected on her journey, not with regret but with understanding. Every step had taught her something important. She learned that endurance has limits and that self-worth must be protected. She learned that strength is not about staying, but about knowing when to leave. The rancher, in his later days, came to understand something too. Control had given him order, but it had taken away connection. He could not change the past, but he could sit with the truth of it. In that truth, there was a quiet lesson about listening, about respect, about what truly lasts. The story did not end with victory or defeat. It ended with growth, earned through difficulty. Two lives moved in different directions, shaped by the same experience but changed in different ways. One learned the cost of control. The other learned the power of choice. And in that ending there was meaning, not loud, not dramatic, but real. A reminder that dignity is not something given, it is something claimed. And once claimed, it changes everything.